everyone. So welcome to forecasting. This is the full video lecture on that topic, okay? On forecasting, chapter 15. Excuse me, I'm still a little sick. So the objectives of the chapter: understand the 3-time horizons, explain when to use each of the 4 models, apply the naive moving average, exponential smoothing, and we're only going to do seasonal method. Compute the 3 measures of forecast accuracy, develop seasonal indices, no regression and correlation analysis, and no tracking signal. So what is forecasting? It's the process of predicting a future event. It's the underlying basis of all business decisions regarding production, inventory, personnel, and facilities. So when you have a forecast, it tells you how much you're going to make or sell in the next week, the next day, the next 3 months, the next year. And that will help you determine how much staff you need, how much you need to produce, how much inventory you need to have in the store, and how big your facility should be. There are 3 forecasting time horizons. You have the short range forecast, which is up to a year, but usually less than 3 months. So the short range forecast is usually like on a daily or weekly basis. In some cases, it could even be up to the minute or, up to the minute. But usually like a daily or a weekly forecast. Excuse me. You use it when you want to determine purchasing, job scheduling especially. So let's say you work in a hospital. Right, we're coming up to the holiday season now where a lot of babies tend to get born between late November and Christmas or late November and New Year. So you want to figure out how much staff do you need. You want to make sure you have enough doctors available to to support your hospital's needs. Then you have workforce levels, job assignments, and production levels. For the medium range forecast, it's usually 3 months to 3 years. That's where you get a little bit more into sales and production planning and budgeting. So between 3 months and a year, 3 months and a year is usually more what are our sales goals for the next year. Okay, and then when you start getting into budgeting, you start thinking about, do you have enough capacity for like the new item launches? What's going to launch? Do you have enough space? I'm still having trouble with my voice. Sorry. Do you have enough space? And are there any gaps versus the goals or the company's financial goals? And will you be able to deliver those? And then the long range forecast, still having trouble with my voice. Excuse me. It's 3-year plan, right? Come back again. Do you have enough capacity? If the business is growing, then do you need to add additional production facilities in order to keep up with demand? How much do you need to invest in R&D and so on? The distinguishing differences, we won't really get into this again, but I think I just went through it. But the key thing to remember is that for the short-term forecasts, they tend to be more accurate than the longer-term forecasts. Life cycle matters will drive, what kind of forecast methodology you use or what answers you're trying to answer with the forecast. So for a new item launch, right, it's usually very different than something that's, an older, more mature, stable product. It's a different approach to the forecast. Also very different for something that's declining, right? So when you're launching, you want to make sure you have enough material available, you have enough capacity available to support the growth and the launch of this item. Once it's more mature, then you can probably use a different forecast method because it's pretty repetitive or predictable. So you know what your volume on a day-to-day or a month or annual basis is. So it's just a pretty repetitive process. It's stable. You can predict your staffing needs, your inventory levels, and the factory capacity. And when the business is declining, such as like, let's say, an iPhone 6, right? That's declining or if not dead. You want to ensure you're not producing any more of that item or too much of that item. And you want to really focus on managing down the existing inventory that you have. product life cycle, we'll skip that. We spoke about it already. But here's just some examples of the Apple smartwatch is still in the introductory growth phase. So it's a different approach, such as also electric vehicles. Mature would be the Xbox or laptop computers. And then on the decline, some computers are really on the decline. I think more PCs are declining. DVDs are probably dead. I haven't seen a DVD in a long time. And then video physical rentals, like a video store, that's dead. Just going back real quick, just to speak about this a little bit. So when you're doing an introduction or the growth phase, forecast is really critical. You have to get it right. You don't want to miss any potential sales. You have short production runs, but high production costs because you haven't achieved scale yet. You don't want to produce too much, so you're going to end up with something if it's a dud, right? Extra inventory if it's a dud. But then you also want to, you have to be producing as much as you can to keep up with something that's fast growing. Limited models focus on quality. What is more mature, as I mentioned before, it's standardized production. You're at your optimal capacity. It's a very stable process. You can do longer runs because you already know the volume is predictable. So it's okay to carry a little bit more inventory. And then when it's on the decline, you want to have cost minimization, reduce the capacity, right? You don't want to dedicate too much resources to something that's declining. And you also don't want to end up with too much inventory. Types of forecasts. So we have the economic forecast, the technological forecast, and then a demand forecast. Economic forecast helps you understand what's going on in the economy, what's the inflation rate, the money supply, housing starts, and so on. And you have the technological forecast, tells you the rate of technological progress. And then the demand forecast, which is the everyday sales for existing products and services. You also have the strategic importance of forecasting, right? For supply chain management, it helps you to have good relationships with your suppliers, so people know what it is you need to, know in advance what it is you're going to purchase. One of the best practices I've learned, in working, is that you actually share your forecast with your suppliers, so that they can plan accordingly to ensure that they can provide exactly what it is you need when you need it. That's the whole point of matching supply and demand. Then you can also ensure you have the right human resources, right, to hire and train your staff, and the capacity, so you can avoid capacity shortages, and ensure you can meet your deliveries, keep your customers, and maintain market share. We're going to skip this. We're going to skip this. Skip that. Elements of a good forecast. The forecast should be timely. It should be accurate. It should be reliable. It should be expressed in meaningful units. Meaning, if you need to sell just one item, plan for one item, as opposed to forecasting in the thousands when your demand is really maybe only 100 units. Okay, so it needs to be meaningful in that sense. It should be in writing. The technique should be simple to understand and use, and it should be cost effective. Several steps in forecasting. Determine what's the use of the forecast. Okay, short term, medium, long term, production, staffing, capacity. Select the items to be forecasted. Determine the time horizon of the forecast. Select the forecasting model. Gather the data needed to make the forecast. Make the forecast, and then validate and implement the results. Key thing to remember, forecasts are always wrong. Okay? You can try and reduce or minimize the errors as best as you can, but don't beat yourself if it's never perfect. One of the things I learned, don't fall out with marketing and other cross-functional teams trying to get it perfect either, right? Because it's always wrong. The degree of inaccuracy, you can try and manage that, but just try to meet somewhere in the middle and try and keep everybody happy. Forecasting approaches, you have the qualitative method. It's used when the situation is vague and little data exists. You have new products, new technology involves intuition, experience, and such as forecasting on the internet. Quantitative methods, that's the more numerical basis. So it's used when the situation is stable and historical data exists, such as when you have existing products, existing technology. So examples of qualitative methods, you have the jury of executive opinion, where people who are experts, right, they come in and they give you their opinion on how much they think can be sold, what they think a new item's going to do, and then you can, augment that with some statistical models. Then you have the Delphi method, where you have a panel of experts. The Salesforce composite is also another good qualitative approach. I used to do this before when I worked with a candy company. I'd have to call up the Salesforce, several months before the season to try and understand how much they think they're going to sell this year versus last year, the particular mix of products that they're going to sell, right? Because usually the sales team, has a better understanding of what's going to sell in the marketplace or what orders they're going to write or get, compared to somebody who's sitting in an office. And then you have the market survey, where you ask the customer. We'll just get details on that. With the Salesforce composite is that sometimes, sales guys are really self-involved and think that they're the best things since sliced bread, or they can sell water or ice to an Eskimo. So they might be a little over optimistic in their sales projections. So you take it with a grain of salt. But if somebody's really, really good and continually exceeds expectations, then you have to take whatever their word is for it, okay? Don't just assume that they're overstating their forecast and take it down. The only thing I wanted to know is judgment. That's qualitative. Then you have the quantitative approach. You have the naive approach, the moving average, exponential smoothing, trend projection, linear regression, time series models, and the associative model. I won't be getting into the linear regression approach. So time series is a set of evenly spaced numerical data. It's obtained by observing response, variable at regular time periods, and it's only based on past values that you try to predict future. So you have the different components of the time series model. You have the trend, meaning if there's an increase, noticeable upward trend or a declining trend. Cyclical, meaning it repeats every so often. Seasonal, meaning it repeats every 4 months, every quarter, every year. And in random, there is no kind of pattern, the demand trend or the demand signals. So with the trend, it's typically several years in duration. It can be caused by changes due to population, technology, age, and culture. Seasonal is due to weather and also holiday customs and so on. So we know Christmas is a big season. Halloween is another season for candy. Valentine's, right, is also another season. So that's what seasonality measures. And it occurs within a single year. Cyclical is up and down movements. Cyclicality is impacted by any kind of business cycle, political and economic factors. It could be multiple years in duration. And random component is erratic, unsystematic residual fluctuations, right? And it's short in duration and non-repeating. It's not predictable. So let's start with the different approaches. You have the naive approach. It assumes demand in the next period is the same as the demand in the most recent period. So the example here is that if in January the sales were 68, then in February the sales will also be 68. It's sometimes cost effective and efficient, and it can be a good starting point. So ideally, you use a naive approach if you have a new business. Okay? You're not quite sure. You did the business plan, you have your optimistic projections. But when you have to really come down to, let's say, how much staff do I need or how much do I need to produce, you're going to just make a quick assumption. Hey, whatever I did yesterday or whatever I did last week, that's what I'm going to do next week or tomorrow. Okay? It's a starting point. So the example here for the data given below, what would be the naive forecast for period 5? Period 1, you did 58. Period 2, you did 59. Period 3, you did 60. Period 4, you did 61. So in period 5, you're going to also do 61 because you're just going to replicate what you did in period 4. That's all it is. Another example here, The pizza chain, we have 4 evenings where they sell pizza Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. 29, 25, 35, and 30 pizzas respectively. So Friday we're going to use a naive approach. So if my last day was Thursday and I sold 30 pizzas on Thursday, on Friday I'm also going to sell the same 30. It doesn't matter. It's not taking in rationality like, any kind of seasonal component where every Friday or on weekends we have more volume. It's just assuming whatever we did yesterday is exactly what we're going to do tomorrow. Moving averages is the next approach. So it's used if there's little or no trend, and is used often for smoothing. So moving average really is the sum of all the previous histories or whatever number of periods we're going to review divided by the number of periods. So we could have a 3-month moving average. So we'd add up the last 3 periods divided by 3 to get the forecast for the next period. So for example, in January we did 10, in February we did 12, in March we did 13, April's forecast would be 10 plus 12 plus 13 divided by 3, which would be 11, and so on and so forth. Here, given the historical data, what is the 3-period moving average forecast for period 6? So period 1 was 73, period 2 was 68, period 3 is 65, period 4 is 72, period 5 is 67. So what we would take, it's period 6, P6 is going to be equal to P5 plus P4 plus P3, all divided by 3. So it's a 67 plus 72 plus 65 divided by 3, and that gives me 68. Next, a pizza chain has had sales for takeout food over the last 4 evenings, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, of 29, 25, 35, and 30 pizzas. So what is the forecast for Friday using a 3-day moving average? So here it already gave it to us. There's a 25 plus 35 plus 30 divided by 3. Okay, and that is equal to 30. If they ask for a four moving average, if that's for 4 moving average, give me 1 second, let me just erase this. Okay, so then it would be the 29 plus the 35 plus 30 plus 25, divided by 4, and then you determine the forecast from there. Here's another example. What is the forecast for May using a 4-month average? So then it would be 40 plus 42 plus 48 plus 46 divided by 4 to get the forecast. The weighted moving average. So here we have a little trend, and we also want to put more weight or emphasis or importance on the more recent data. Okay? And that's based on experience and intuition. So here, for example, we're going to go back to where January was 10, February was 12, and March was 13. But we have decided, that we want to give most weight or the most importance to the most recent month, a little less weight to 2 months ago, and then even lesser weight to 1 month ago, right? To 3 months ago, I'm sorry. So it's going to be 3 times 13, which is the last month, plus 2 times 12, which is for 2 months ago, plus 1 times 10, divided by the sum of the weights, which is 6, divided by 6. Okay? It has to be, the difference here versus the regular moving average is divided by the sum of the weights. Potential problems with the moving average. It increasing ends smooths the forecast and makes it less sensitive to changes. It doesn't capture trends well, and it requires a lot of historical data. Here's another example. Suppose a 4-period weighted average is being used to forecast demand. Weights for the periods are as follows. So 4 periods ago is 0.1, 3 periods ago is 0.2, 2 periods ago is 0.3, 1 period ago is 0.4. And then 4 months ago, the forecast, the actual was 380. It was 410 3 months ago, 291 2 months ago, and 400 1 month ago. So here is the formula, what you would do. So it's the 0.1, which is this one, times the 380, plus 0.2 times the 410, plus 390 times the 0.3, and then 0.4, which is the most recent, times the most recent data of 400 to give you 397. So the answer would be B. John's House of Pancakes uses a weighted moving average method, to forecast pancake sales. It assigns a weight of 5 to a previous month's demand, 3 to 2 months ago, and 1 to 3 months ago. If sales amounted to 1,000 pancakes in May, 2,200 in June, and 3,000 in July, what's the forecast for August? So let's start with July. July is 3,000 times 5 plus 2,200 times 3 plus 1,000 times, I can't even see this. I'm going to assume I said 1. And then you sum that up, and it's divided by 531. So that's 8. So that's 9. And the answer is B, which is 2511. I'm sorry, I can't see what's on the other side. But you get the understanding, okay? So it's the most recent, which is 3,000, times the 5, times 2,200, times the 3, and then the 1,000 times whatever is right, that's hidden. So we call that 1, right? And then it's sum that up, divided by the sum of the weights. So 5 plus 3 plus 1 is 9, to give me 2511, and that's B. Next approach, exponential smoothing. It's a form of the weighted moving average, but here we have a constant that's called alpha. It ranges from 0 to 1, and it doesn't require a ton of historical. So the forecast for using exponential smoothing is the new forecast is equal to the last period's forecast, not the actual, mind you, the last period's forecast, plus alpha times the last period's actual demand minus the last period's forecast. So let's get an example. So we know that our predicted demand is 140, the actual was 153, and alpha is equal to 0.2. So we're trying to calculate the forecast for the next period. So the forecast is the forecast for the last period plus alpha times your actual minus the forecast. Like this portion here, the 153 minus the 142, is also considered the error for the last period. Okay? So to get the new forecast, it's the prior period's forecast plus alpha times the error, forecast error. And here we get it, 142 plus 2.2 to give us 144 cars. The smoothing constant is generally between 0.05 or 0.5. As alpha increases, all the values become less significant. So the larger alpha gives you, it's more weight on the new data, more weight on more recent data, so on. Okay, so given an actual demand of 59, a previous forecast of 64, and an alpha of 0.3, was the forecast for the next period. So once again, the formula is the new forecast is equal to the forecast of the last period, which was 64, plus alpha times the actual, which was 64, minus the demand, 59. So it's 59 minus 64, my bad. Sorry about that. It's 59 minus 64. 16. Keep doing that. 54 minus 69. So this comes out to minus 5. So it's 64 minus 5. So 64 plus alpha, which is 0.3, times minus 5. And whatever that comes out to. Another example, given actual demand of 105, a forecast of 97, and an alpha of 0.4. Using exponential smoothing for the next period, what's the forecast? So the forecast here would be new forecast is equal to old forecast, which was 97, plus alpha times 97 minus 105. And in here would get 100.2 as our answer. So the objective here is to maintain the most accurate forecast no matter the technique. All right, so it's important when you have the different methods, the whole objective is really to minimize your forecast error. Okay, you're going to choose the method that gives you the least error. So when you're thinking about the project, when you're thinking about your projects, right, and you want to decide what's the best forecast method to present in the final selection, is the one that's going to give you the least error. So we have three approaches. You have the mean absolute deviation. And that's called the MAD. You have the mean squared error, and then you have the MAPE, which is the mean absolute error. The two most common approaches are the mean absolute deviation, which is the MAD, and the MAPE, mean absolute percent error. So here, our pizza chain has had sales for takeout food over the last 4 evenings. Oh, this is another exponential smoothing approach, so let's skip that one. Oh, I thought I had an example close by for calculating error. So we'll come back to the error calculations in a minute. So I guess we'll talk about seasonality very quickly. So seasonality, especially now, Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas. So for Halloween, it's a big season for candy. For Thanksgiving, increased demand for pumpkin and turkeys and cranberry sauce. And for Christmas, it's a huge demand for toys and Christmas trees. So those are all distinct seasons. So it's a significant demand change that constitutes a repetitive fluctuation over time. The seasonal index is the estimated multiplicative factor that allows us to move from the average overall demand and to get the demand for the particular season. And then deseasonalizing something or deseasonalizing an actual removes the seasonal impact from the past. So let's think about it this way. Think about some turkey. Let's use turkey, right? So a normal month, a normal day, anytime from January to September, October. Let's say a store sells only 500 turkeys per month. And I'm just making this up. All right? So our demand for during that period is 500 turkeys per month. Anytime from January through October. However, our demand increases to 1,000 turkeys per month in November. So what you need to factor in here or try to understand is, what's your seasonal index? How much more is your demand versus your normal demand? That's what we're trying to calculate. So to determine your seasonal index is 1,000 turkeys demanded in November divided by the 500, which is your average demand on a normal day or normal month, and you get a seasonal index of 2. So what that says to you is that your seasonality, or for whatever there's a season, right, you're going to have 2 times your demand for turkey versus normal. That's all that's all it is. Let's see if we can find another example. Using the turkey example. So we know, let's go back to using turkey. So once again, 500 in the off months, 1,000 is your demand in November. So your seasonal indices is equal to the 1,000 divided by 500 to give you 2. If next year, so let's say next year Thanksgiving, we're expecting to do, I don't know, 1,250 turkeys, okay? So there's a little trend, there's an increase in demand. So next Thanksgiving, we're expecting to do 1,250, but somebody wants to know how much turkeys then would I sell in July, which is an off month. So we know our seasonal index is 2. So our demand in a non-seasonal month would be the 1,250 divided by 2, and that's 625 turkeys. Okay? So let's go again. Previously, our demand in the off month was 500 turkeys per month. And then we discovered, or we observed, that in Thanksgiving, we sell on average 1,000 turkeys in Thanksgiving. So our seasonal index for Thanksgiving is 2 because it's 1,000 divided by 500. Now, if we go on a few years down the road, we now know, excuse me, that our demand during Thanksgiving for turkeys has now increased to 1,250 turkeys for that period. We know our seasonal index is 2, so somebody wants to know what should be the forecast be then for turkeys in the off months, so let's say Feb, March, April. So you take that same 1,250 divided by the seasonal index of 2 to get 625. Okay, let's move on. Trying to get to the examples. Okay. There's too much details in the chart, so let's go back. This is not a... Or a forecaster. You can sit down and... So a lot of times you can be in an office, right? You know, if you're a demand vacuum and you come up with your own forecast using all the different statistical models. But then you come into what they call a consensus meeting where you have to align with finance and marketing in order to get to that single forecast. You know, when you guys start working, you'll hear about that. It's one number, one forecast to the organization. Some of the challenges with that is everybody has a different things, and they use different assumptions, right, to get to the forecast. So you could end up with if marketing has a stronger pull because they're usually more optimistic, you can end up with a bias where you're constantly overcalling the forecast, right? You usually with sales or marketing, they have a positive bias to overstating the forecast. Then finance and maybe demand planning, they'll have another bias where they tend to undercall the forecast. And that's just one of the challenges of having of doing demand planning. In an ideal world, you want to minimize your forecast error, you want to have no bias, and you want to use either the MAPE or the MAD in order to calculate your forecast error. We'll skip formulas. So the formula here for MAD is the mean absolute deviation, and this 4 is the sum of the actuals minus the forecast divided by n. Hopefully I have an example. So here in one period, right, the actual was 180, but we had forecasted 175. So what's our error here? It's 175. It's 180 minus the 175 to give you a 5 units variance or 5 units error. And then so on the next period, you forecast 177.5, and your actual comes in at 168. So then it would be the 175.5 minus the 168, excuse me, and that's your error. The MAD, as we mentioned, is actually 168. The next error calculation is the mean squared error, where you actually sum the forecast errors, right? So before it was, 180 minus 175, 178 minus 169, and so forth. But with the mean squared error, we're going to take those actual error numbers. So if the actual number of units is 5, we square it divided by the number of observations. That's why it's called the mean squared error. The number is just directional. And it can be a little confusing because people don't really understand or can't really correlate when you square the error versus the actual error, like how big is it, how small is it. So this is one of the lesser used methods of error calculation. The most common is the MAD or the MAPE, as previously mentioned. But let's go through the approach. Excuse me. So in quarter one, the actual was 180. The forecast was 175. So we know that the error in this case was 5 units. So you square the error to get 55. Coming down to the next point, right? It's the actual was 168. Our actual was 175.5. So you do the difference between the two. So it's minus 0.75. You square the error. You get 56.25. And so on. And then you have to sum all of those and then divide by n in order to get the MSC. Previous example, we had some negative numbers, right? If your actual is less than the forecast, you're going to end up with a negative error number. So the MAPE gets rid of that. The last one is the MAPE, which is the mean absolute percent error. So basically here you have to take the absolute error. So if you remember, the MAPE gets rid of that the negative sign by using the absolute number. So when you have an absolute, it's neither positive nor negative. It's just, you're just off by 5, you're off by 10, you're off by 20. And it doesn't matter what direction you're off by, because that's irrelevant. An error is an error. Screen froze. So here, it's 180 and versus 75, so you're just off by 5. 168 versus 168 versus 175.5, you're just off. Your error is 7.5. Directionally, it doesn't matter. Excuse me. Sum up all the different errors, then divide by 1 times 100%. So the MAD tells you how much the forecast missed the target. The MSC is the square of how much the forecast missed the target, and the MAPE is the average percent error. The most common, once again, is the MAD and then the MAPE. When you talk about error, it has negative connotations. So people have now moved away from calculating just the error and more focused on how accurate is my forecast. And I guess there's a there's a mental aspect to, you want to think about how accurate you are versus how wrong you are. So what we do now is actually 1 minus the MAPE. And that's what's reported on a corporate level. When you have a meeting, you're going to speak about your accuracy, not your error. So it's 1 minus the MAPE percent that you calculated. And what's changed in the corporate world is that okay. And now I'm just coming up to the summary here. This is just an example where it takes you through all the different steps. Where you have the actual, you have your forecast, you calculate your errors, and then you determine your MAD, your MAPE, and your MSC. And then I won't show all the details because it's hard through all those examples. So just in terms of choosing what's the best forecast method to use, factors to consider: the cost, the accuracy, the availability of historical data, the availability of forecasting software, the time needed to gather and analyze the data and prepare a forecast, and the forecast horizon. The better the forecasts are, the more able the organization will be to take advantage of future opportunities and to reduce potential risk. So basically, you want to get a good forecast because you want to minimize the excess inventory. You want to minimize producing the wrong items. You want to minimize having the wrong amount of staff or having too much staff. So you want to minimize any kind of expense or kind of mistakes. In closing, the forecast is always wrong, but it's a matter of how wrong you are. If you're consistently wrong, let's say more than 20% off, then your job will be at risk. In an ideal world, you want to be less than 10% wrong on a continuous basis. So your content always have to update whatever process or approach you're using to determine the forecast. If you use, let's say, exponential smoothing this month, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to use exponential smoothing next month. Or you might continue to use exponential smoothing, but you might have to change your alpha factor. Okay, you have to constantly review, are my assumptions valid? Did anything change since the last time? And make sure you consistently document your assumptions so that when you are off and when you do miss the forecast, you at least know why you were wrong. Okay? And that's it for the end of forecasting. So please complete your assignments and please follow up with me if you have any questions. Thank you. Bye-bye.